So you have a business that is looking to set off and reach for the stars. You have a goal or have targets, but you do not know where to start or where to go. You want to transform your business, have a structure, or even have assistants. Then guys, look no further than Olive and Palm. Olive and Palm are a business consultancy firm that specialize in transforming your company into becoming the best it can be. With expertise in digital and agile transformations, they will bring cutting-edge strategies, innovative solutions, and first-person approach to make sure your vision comes to life or get to the next step. Olive and Palm have worked with names such as EasyJet, British Airways, Boots, American Express, Specsavers, Sports Direct, John Lewis, and so much more. So why pick Olive and Palm? Because not only do they have years of expertise and big names behind them, but they are passionate and they do care. They are determined to help you reach your goals. So if you want to get in contact with them, dial on their number at 075525 00041. Or you can even email them at molly@palm-olive.com. Again, their phone number is 075525 00041. And again, their email is molly@palm-olive.com. Hey guys, how's it going? Rhys here, our Creative Space podcast. Of course, I am your host, and alongside with me is my dear, good friend,
Lewis John Arnold.
And today's guest on the show is none other than the original founding member of Megadeth, David Ellefson. Now, David Ellefson and us two, we talk about loads, don't we? We talk about, when he first picked up a guitar, all the strings material. I mean, you went so in depth with what guitar, which style, which
talking
project.
About all the gear, absolutely, with no idea, but having a good time while doing it. We talk about the ideas of being terrified on the road, some scary stories, some fun stories, and it ends up being quite a fun, if anything, he was just saying so many lovely stories to us.
Yeah, and he was cool, he was awesome, and it was just I think such an honor to have someone like him on the show, especially, being part of Megadeth and being part of the Big Four.
As well as a different accompaniment of side projects with other different bands such as Soulfly, Killing Machine, like so many great little side projects he's done in his own current tour that he's got around at the moment.
Yeah, and it's just an honor to have him for just an hour just to talk about all these things, and we want you to enjoy it. So without further ado, let's get down to it. It's us two and Dave Ellefson on Creative Space Podcast. Then Dave Ellefson on the podcast here, and you're back now, aren't you? You're back after. He came out. This is his second episode, right? He doesn't normally do the podcast with me. It's only if I get like a rock star on the show, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm coming on," and I was like, "Oh, okay, then that's absolutely fine." But we're so excited to talk to you, and thank you for taking the time to do this, David. I really appreciate it.
Well, and he has a gold t-shirt, so there you go.
Yeah, here we go. No, this is the thing now. It's like, where do we start? Where do we start on this journey for this podcast? So I'll start off by going, what was the reason that made you fall in love with music or wanted to get into music?
It's funny you should ask, because literally a couple nights ago, I went down to Mannheim, Germany to go see Sweet, who I wanted to see last year at Wacken, and I didn't get there in time that day to be able to see him. That was the band when I was probably 10 or 11 years old. So I was born in 1964. I missed all the 60s stuff, even the Beatles, and I knew of Elvis because my mom was an Elvis fan, but really it was kind of the mid 70s, kind of about 1974, 75. So I would have been like 10 years old. Me and my brother rode the school bus every morning into town. We lived on a farm, so we were outside. Like, it's kind of like about an hour journey. 7:15 to 8:15 was the school bus route, and then school started at 8:30 a.m. Right, and it was on that school bus ride. This one year in particular, it was the pastor's son, ironically, Dwight. I remember what was his name, and he had long hair. He was a cool guy. And he would listen to WLS AM station out of out of Chicago. And they had a cool playlist. I mean, that was where I heard Sweet, Ballroom Blitz, eventually Fox on the Run. I mean, so that when I heard Ballroom Blitz, I'm like, all right, I no longer want to be like a fireman or a policeman or, the dreams that boys have, right? Girls, I don't know, they want to be nurses and boys want to be firemen or whatever. Like all of a sudden, that shit stopped immediately. As soon as I heard, the beginning, are you ready, Steve? Uh-huh. I was just like, and once the guitar came in, I'm like, game over. And then right behind it was the Kiss Destroyer record. I guess that came out in '76. So I was, I guess, 11 going into, age 12 around that time. And then that's when I got a bass as after that. So really it was kind of Sweet, the Desolation Boulevard album that had Ballroom Blitz and Sweet FA and all these fucking killer tunes on it. And then Bachman Turner Overdrive, they had Taking Care of Business had come out, I think, in '73 on the BTO2 album, and then the Not Fragile album came out that had You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, and the opening tune, Not Fragile, which I've since recorded on my Ellefson No Cover record, and the downbeat, the needle drop was the bass, and I didn't even really know what a bass was, and then I opened the BTO album, and Fred Turner's got a black Rickenbacker 4001. Like when Geddy Lee played and shit. And it was long and had 4 fat strings and it just sounded cool. I loved it. So, I kind of find that your instrument chooses you. You don't choose an instrument, you're sort of, the rock and roll gods of the heavens kind of decide what you're going to do and who you're going to be. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Especially with them as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, look, if you wanted to hear the Ellefson No Cover album that I did during COVID, that is a pretty good playlist of like this. These are songs I like. I grew up with, Queen, Sheer Heart Attack, which is off News of the World. Ironically, it's not off the Sheer Heart Attack album. It came out later. I remember that year when so basically like, I discover all these bands, and I remember at Christmas, probably '76, my mom bought my brother, Heart, Dreamboat Annie, which I would come to love as well because that had kick-ass tunes on it. But and then I got Queen Night at the Opera, and I couldn't figure out Night at the Opera. I was like, is this like a musical? Is this like a Broadway? Because my mom had bought Jesus Christ Superstar. That when she bought her Wurlitzer organ because she sang in the church choir, right? That was my first musical instrument, was learning how to play the organ, right? And so she had Jesus Christ Superstar, which I would then learn. Ian Gillan from Deep Purple was on that, but there was something like I go to church, you hear that message, and I come home and I listen to Jesus Christ Superstar. And it's like I like this better, and it sounds really kind of not right, and kind of dangerous, and like this seems like more of an illicit tale of sorts, So I kind of trended towards, all that we love about rock and metal.
Well, you go on to mention bands such as like Sweet, for example. So we're based in Cardiff at the moment. They're going to be playing Cardiff on the 3rd of April, and I'm going to go see them because, again, like you mentioned, my first introduction with Sweet was, funny enough, Fox on the Run, and then it was Ballroom Blitz, and then I just became a fan from there. But then, like you mentioned, the Queen Sheer Heart Attack, Dreamboat Annie from Heart. I recently, funny enough, actually picked up those records myself because I'm a massive fan of vinyl and everything recently. So I've picked up those. I picked up Journey, but then also within the collection, I've got a lot of thrash. So like from everything of the Big Four. My music taste tends to be very, very eclectic. But as you mentioned, the bass. And you mentioned the BC Rich that Getty played. In terms of playing bass, who would you say that influenced you? Because like you mentioned Getty, but did anyone such as like? Because I remember speaking with like a couple of other like bass players that I'm familiar with that I chat to with like through the little local bands that I work with. They go on to mention Lemmy. They go on to mention Geezer. But one thing that stands out with you as a bass player. You have a very, very punchy sound, and I've noticed in a couple of interviews you mentioned that you play with a pick, and there's that attack and that ferocity. Where did that come from?
So for me, it's funny. I just absolutely love Steve Priest from Sweet, and he was the kind of the guy in the front on the Desolation Boulevard album. And it's funny, the other night during one of their songs, I can't even remember which one it was. And by the way, absolutely go see them. It's fucking killer, you know. And Andy's the last, he's the guitar player. He's, you know, the last
Yeah.
of the original members. And I did meet Steve Priest briefly. His wife Maureen worked for Salters and Roskins, who was a big publicity firm out of New York and L.A. And Capitol Records had hired her, them to work. I think Countdown to Extinction and maybe the Euthanasia records. So as I'm dealing with Maureen, who is our publicist, she just in passing happens to mention, yeah, my husband is Steve Priest from Sweet. I'm like, whoa, hold on, time out. You know, I mean, just fanboy. And I remember we were at an event. It was some cocktail party event in LA. And Steve was there. So I went over, and me and Marty Friedman, you know, went over and fanboyed on him a little bit. And he didn't seem as excited about the discussion as we were. You know what I mean? We were like, oh my God, this is, you know, same with Ricky Medlock, you know, who is now at Leonard Skinner. You know, me and Marty were huge Blackfoot fans, right? So we'd geek out with Ricky about Train and all this killer shit. So, but yeah, it's funny that, you know, when we recorded Sweet FA on the Ellefson No Cover record, I mean, it was so important that I deep dived all of his licks and got all of his parts. And he was a great singer. You know, I think that's the thing for me growing up. I grew up with, you know, everybody kind of, I guess, maybe modeled the Beatles a little bit, looking at it, where everybody in the band sang. Kiss was like that. Obviously, Ace didn't sing until much later. And then once we heard Ace sing, we're like, fuck, this guy not only writes great songs, but he's the best one to sing his songs. And as I've read the Kiss history now, at some point, Gene and those guys said, "Look, you need to sing your own songs. Like, you know, like we're, you know, I say, you know, Gene sang Cold Gin, and you know, there's the other guys sang the tunes. But finally, once they made him sing, which was great, and I know that because, you know, in Megadeth, I was never the lead singer. You know, Dave stepped up and sang, and he was the best at singing his words, at singing his stories, because really lyrics, it's a story, right? So when I listened to Bachman Turner Overdrive, Randy Bachman sang, ironically, most of the kind of their bigger hits, you know, Taking Care of Business, You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet. But Fred Turner, you know, he had like the ultimate bitchin' biker voice, you know. And in fact, I think James Hetfield has given kudos to him as kind of an influence to his, you know, style of his singing as well. So, you know, for me, it was kind of part of it was the bass playing, but it was always about songs, and it was about, you know, in all my bands growing up, I was always a lead singer. You know, I'd sing and play bass. When my voice dropped in puberty, that's when I just kind of acquiesced it over to someone else. My friend Greg Handevitt, he was always the lead singer in our bands growing up. He just had a better voice. I just felt I felt a little too safe. You know, rock and roll is supposed to be dangerous and, you know, come out and grab you. But, you know, I'm over here on Bass Warrior Tour, and I sing a few songs, and people enjoy it. They like hearing my voice, especially if it's a song I wrote, something that I'm a part of. They like hearing. I can sing a lot of the Megadeth stuff. Quite honestly, I've sort of in the background been singing it in my mind for 40 years as I've been performing it on stage. Because to me, it's not just about a bass line. You know, I'm just a member amongst members, right? So you're part of an ensemble. So I'm always cueing off guitar parts. I'm cueing off vocal parts. You know, so, but, you know, to answer, I guess, your question about how I got my bass tone, it really just kind of developed as kind of a need to be heard. You know, I couldn't, you know, the Fender P bass, I remember when I was a kid, I'd go to music stores and the thing was $400 to $500 and I could afford about $250 to $300, right? So I could never afford one. So I never had a Fender until much later. I couldn't afford an SVT. God, they were $1,600. Shit, they're $4,000 or $5,000 now. I couldn't afford one. You know, I'd hit my parents as much as I could to get gear, but you know, I was just, you know, and you know, honestly, my family, we had the money, but they were just kind of like, all right, let's see how serious you are about this. You know, what I'm more appreciative of my parents, less about buying me gear, more about letting me go to Hollywood and go be a rock star, because that was more important than having an SVT, you know. Yeah, but you know, now, so you know, for me, it was kind of, you know, I think my sound developed as I just need a need to be heard, and as I played with fingers in rock, it was tame. It was a little, as much as I love Geddy and the guys that did that. I tended to use the pick because I could be heard better, you know. And then as I kind of have studied the whole craft here and years later, I look at guys like Lemmy, Gene Simmons, Phil Lynott, a lot of guys who are kind of the singer-songwriters of their bands, you know, the front men that are bass players. Most of them are big players. Paul McCartney, you know, Paul's really a guitar. I learned this as I went. I was in Paraguay, in Asuncion, Paraguay, on a bass story tour back in 2019, and Pete Best, the original drummer before Ringo, was there, staying across the street at the Holiday Inn. I told my promoter, I go, dude, I got to go meet Pete Best, right? So, because so I go over and I meet him, and he's just a nice, very kind, sweet man. And it's funny because he and Dave Mustaine are both in a book called The Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And it's contrasted, you know, Pete's life not getting to be a Beatle and Dave Mustaine's life not getting to be a Metallica guy, you know, essentially, right? And they're very two contrasting stories. And I brought it up to Pete. I said, you know, you and my singer, I was in Megadeth at the time. I said, you know, you guys are both this book. He goes, oh, all right. Yes, I've heard about this, you know, and he mentioned it. He chuckled, you know. Pete is shown in a very good light, you know. But there was like a rich guy who flies him down to Paraguay to play a few songs every year, and so I went to this museum that this guy has. This guy has bought. I think he's in construction, or he's like a builder, right? And so this guy has a museum in his backyard that he has purchased look-alike equipment for every era of the Beatles, from Abbey Road to the Ed Sullivan Show to the Cavern Club. I mean, every mic cable, every skin on the drums. I mean, it's amazing. This guy is. But I learned that that, at least from these guys, that when Paul joined the Beatles, he was a guitar player, and it was literally like a flip a coin, short a straw, who was between him and John, who was going to play bass, right? Now, some would say Paul got the shorter straw and he became the bass player. I'd say he won the lottery because, you know, he became a legend as a bass player. But, you know, as we've seen, he plays piano, he plays guitar, he's a multi-instrumental guy because he's a songwriter, he's a storyteller, right? And so guys like Paul and even Lemmy and probably Phil Lynott, you know, and even Dave and Hetfield. I mean, you know, I find that these kind of guys, they're more like, they're storytellers. You know, they're less about, you know, the gear and the licks and that stuff. They're more about telling their story, you know, through their music and through that. So it's almost like the instrument becomes more of an accompaniment to the story, rather than just being so focused on, hey, dude, what gear do you use? What pick you use? Da 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 da. You know, and I've learned that that's ultimately what the general public wants to hear. They want to hear the story, not like what gauge strings and what pick you use. You know.
It's just really funny though, because we got a bass guitar right in the corner as well, in the corner of
So
my
I got
room.
one over here too.
Oh, well, no, the one in
Most good people have a bass laying around. That's cool. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, though, this is the thing, right? I've not picked up an instrument. I mean, I'm kidding myself. I got to do it one day because you've been pushing me a couple of times, haven't you, to pick up an instrument and just practice or learn. But the reason why I got a bass guitar right in the corner is because it's my grandfather's. It's my dad's dad's. He was in a band in Cardiff and everything. And there's always I'm going to call it like a legendary story, because I don't know how true it is, but apparently there's photographic evidence. But I don't know where they were, probably in England somewhere, maybe in Wales, whatever. And my grandfather and his band were jamming, and after them there was the Who, and basically the members of the Who just basically said, "Do you want to jam with us?" And they were like, "Yeah, okay, no problem." And apparently that's the guitar he played it with, and
Nice.
I was like, "Oh shit." It's like, okay. I'm like, okay, if that's true, because coming from my grandfather at the time, he's one of those guys. I mean, he's passed away now, but for you, but he's always one of those guys where he says it as it is. He's like, well, no, you take my word or you leave it. And I'm just thinking, I need photographic evidence, because if there is, I'm gonna be like, look at that.
His grandfather essentially supported
And you know,
the
the
Who.
funny thing is look, that guitar in, you know, your grandfather's hands was on stage with the Who. In my hands, I'm just a dude playing someone else's guitar. You know what I mean? And you know, that's the funny thing about instruments. The magic. Look, I from time to time go guitar shopping, and it's usually by accident. Like, in fact, one day there's a guitar shop.
Same as him.
Yeah, in Scottsdale, Arizona, and literally, I wanted to buy an ESP guitar for. I just wanted one in my arsenal, and I was going to call ESP and buy a Max Cavalera model, actually, because I was kind of looking on their website. And, all right. And I just happened to be down the street by this little guitar shop. And I walked in and they had a Les Paul, kind of the basic, I think the cheaper version of like an Alex Skolnick model. And I picked it up. It was like $275. I pick it up, I plug it in, and like songs are just falling out of it. I'm just like riffing. I'm going, wow, what a creative instrument. I literally bought it on the spot, you know.
Oh, there's a little bit of a freeze there.
Yeah.
Looks like we make. Oh, looks like
there we go.
Hey,
He's back.
hey, we're dealing with hotel Wi-Fi here.
That's understandable.
But yeah, so anyway, you know, I ended up buying a guitar on the spot, and it was cheap. You know, wasn't pricey. Now, same thing happened a year or two later. I happened to go to the same guitar shop, and I look up, and there's a PD T40 bass, which was one I wanted to buy when I was a kid. My family and I, we took a vacation one winter down to Florida, and we passed through Nashville and Atlanta. And when I was in Atlanta, I went to this guitar store, and the PD T40 and T40 bass and 260 guitar had just come out. And I saw like Ross Valerie from Journey was playing one. It was, you know, getting some looks, you know, and I played great, sounded cool. But my dad, he asked me, he goes, is that really the bass you really, really want? Or is there something else that you would prefer? And I said, well, I would prefer this BC Rich Mockingbird that I saw. And he asked how much that was. And, you know, I was like, oh, that's $900, you know, not, I thought he was going to be mad at me. And he said, he goes, well, why don't you just, when we get home, why don't we buy that one? Because if that's the one you really want, I'd rather you have, he said, he goes, buy right the first time, spend more money and buy what you really want. Because if you buy this PV for $240, you're going to still want the BC Rich for $900. So just spend $900 and buy the right one you really want. And he was right, because I really never thought much about the PV again until much later in my life. You know, and I worked for PV for 7 years. I ran artist relations for Hartley, and I saw a lot of guitars and stuff there, and got to know Hartley and his theories about guitars. And, you know, in his mind, the best guitars are yet to be built. He was not a big vintage guitar guy, which I appreciate with him, because I'm like that too. I think I like brand new spanking fucking tone is killer. That's just my preference of tone. So years later, you know, so I walk into this same guitar shop. There's a PVT 40 bass hanging on the wall, and it was, I think, $699. So no longer 240, but given inflation, that's about right. But the case was great. It played great. I'm just, again, riffs are falling out, and I call my friend John Accolino there in town, who has the big studio I work at, and I said, brother, what do you think? And he said, I Googled it quickly. Those things are going for double that easily all day long. So he goes, buy it. If you like it, buy it. You know, so, you know, I bought it. I swiped the card, bought it, took it home. I've written a ton of shit. I wrote a lot of Dieth riffs on it. I wrote some stuff for the Lucid on it. You know, so it's not a performance bass for me. It's a riff writing bass, you know, and I kind of keep it there. Same with that guitar. I keep that ESP guitar in my sort of riff writing arsenal, you know, and then I go on stage, I perform with the Jacksons. I've got some Fenders and Modulus and a Spectre that I keep around just for recording purposes, because I just know if I plug them in, they're going to work, and we don't have to spend the afternoon trying to get tone. They just work out of the box, you know. So for me, I kind of have they're tools, you know. They're not. I'm not a guitar collector per se. I'm a get what I need to get the job done kind of performer, you know. That's how I am with instruments and gear.
That's honestly a really good mindset to have, especially I remember watching an interview with you. So when I was getting into music, when I was like younger and getting into being, well, a guitar player primarily, because I was like, there was that phase where I was like, I want a bass. But then my friend just went, no, you're getting a guitar. I'm on the bass. I'm like, okay, fair enough. And while I used to watch a bunch of different bass players as well, a bunch of different guitar players, and your name would come up quite a few times. And I clicked on a video, I think it was for Total Guitar or something along the lines. But I remember in the interview, you go on to mention how certain instruments can have a song or a riff in them. And I think one of the ones that were talked about is that you had an eight string given to you from another band. And out of that eight string came the riff to Dawn Patrol. And
Yeah,
how
Jimmy Bain. Yeah, Jimmy Bain loaned me his. He had this really baller Yamaha endorsement, and we had just done the Dio Megadeth Sabotage tour earlier that year, and he loaned me that bass. So this would have been 1988, so kind of late. I went over to his house in L.A. and Jimmy was so sweet. All right, man, take the bass. I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, here, take it. Here, try this one too. He just handed me guitars, take home, and so I took that one home and I pulled that eight string out, and it just has such a unique tone, and just the way it sounded, the way my hands fell on the strings. All of a sudden, I would have never written those notes. Those note choices in Dawn Patrol are so random. I would have never written anything like that on any other instrument. And I think just for the sake of kind of continuity of the Megadeth sound and knowing what we would ever perform on stage, I just recorded it with a Jackson 4-string. But to create the riff, it happened like that. I mean, Family Tree, the kind of the main riff of the song. Da, 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 da. I wrote that on piano. It was like ba da ba da ba ba da ba ba, right? And Dave came over to the house and I showed it to him one day, and he's like, "That's actually very cool." And then we just moved it over to guitar, and there it is. So things can be composed kind of anywhere, and then for the purposes of getting it on record, you record however you need to with whatever instrument you need to make that work.
So you have a business that is looking to set off and reach for the stars. You have a goal or have targets, but you do not know where to start or where to go. You want to transform your business, have a structure, or even have assistants. Then guys, look no further than Olive and Palm. Olive & Palm are a business consultancy firm that specialize in transforming your company into becoming the best it can be. With expertise in digital and agile transformations, they will bring cutting-edge strategies, innovative solutions, and first-person approach to make sure your vision comes to life or get to the next step. Olive & Palm have worked with names such as EasyJet, British Airways, Boots, American Express, Specsavers, Sports Direct, John Lewis, and so much more. So why pick Olive & Palm? Because not only do they have years of expertise and big names behind them, but they are passionate and they do care. They are determined to help you reach your goals. So if you want to get in contact with them, dial on their number at 07555 00041. Or you can even email them at molly@palm-olive.com. Again, their phone number is 07555 00041. And again, their email is molly@palm-olive.com. I'm just gonna quickly go into it because obviously with Megadeth, it was part of the big four, wasn't it? With Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. But I was watching. I don't know why I was watching Stranger Things the other night, and yeah, it was Metallica playing and everything. But I just wanted to know, so because it was like with heavy metal or thrash metal, any kinds of forms of metal back in the 80s, there was always this perception or the reception of it was not taken too kind unless there was a certain audience for you guys that
unless
had
you were
fun
in that scene,
in
yeah.
that scene. So I wanted to know from your perspective, what was it like around that time, especially in the 80s, where bands like Megadeth, Metallica, and maybe even Iron Maiden, etc., were received from audiences that were not following metal?
Oh, they hated us. That was the point of it.
Gotta get it
Look,
out there.
yeah, great music is very polarizing. You know what I mean? It's Kanye West. Some people love him, some people not so much. It's out of my
Outstanding.
wheelhouse, so I don't listen to it. I'm just thinking him off the top of my head
Yeah,
because
yeah.
he's a name that when you hear it, you're
Mm.
either on board with it, or it's polarizing. And there's very few people. Taylor Swift kind of checks all the boxes that it's pretty mainstream. People kind of just naturally just like her, and she's not an offensive artist. She kind of seems to be inclusive, and that's kind of a diamond in the rough, because especially when you're talking about rock and roll and rap is kind of rock and roll for that audience. It's very polarizing. Some of the best rap and that stuff that I've enjoyed has been, funny lyrics, kind of very, whether it was Grandmaster Flash or Ice-T or, Run DMC, whatever. So, I listen to everything and I hear everything because I travel around the world. I don't like everything, and I don't have to. Nobody does. It's some stuff I'm just like, hey, I get why you like it. And that's cool, but it's just not my song, man. It's just not my thing. And that's okay. That's why we have a lot of different music. Is that there's
Yeah.
something for everybody. Metal and hard rock, that's my thing. Like I said, it's kind of like every decade. The '50s was kind of the invention of it. The Buddy
Mm.
Holly, Elvis, that thing. It was kind of coming out of rhythm and blues, and it turned into rock and roll. And then the '60s was kind of the wild exploration, exploratory. Woodstock being kind of the penultimum of let's just find our way. And then it kind of seemed like in the '70s, things were getting a lot more refined, as I heard Styx. I should put Styx in with Sweet and BTO, by the way, too, because again, them being from Chicago, they were played a lot on that radio station. But the early stuff like Lady and Lorelei and stuff from those early records. And then Come Sail Away was the big hit for them that got them rolling. But things were more refined. Guitar tones were better. Recording processes seemed to be better. Um, the '70s still had some cool stuff. They were playing with the talk box. The wah wah was not very. The wah wah kind of became with Motorhead, and then certainly with Kirk Hammett, that just became a staple of their lead guitar styles. And I always tell guitar players now that I play with, it's like, would you please get unchained from your pedal board? Like that, because it's funny because in the '90s, I'm like, we went out with Rest in Peace, we got rid of all the pedal boards. I guess maybe we still had pedal boards. Dave and Marty had, but they were all rack mount stuff because we were, trying to, keep things not lo-fi, very hi-fi. And then, obviously when Seattle music came, it all came back to curly chords, you know, ugly sweaters and like electro harmonics, and distortion pedals on the floor. Everything went real lo-fi again, and that became a trend. And I've never had a pedal board. I actually kind of have one now, more just because I've got such a wide variety of songs that I play, like in my tours. So I'll need once in a while a distortion patch, sometimes a lead boost, for playing kind of lead bass lines and stuff and featured lines. Um, Other than that, I don't really like them. I think guitar players can get so attached to them. They can't get away from the wah wah. They're always there, and it's like, man, when you're playing freaking lead featured parts, you need to be center stage, downstage, unleashed from that. And I'm glad I grew up in an era and in a band where eventually we got all those pedal boards off and we had the technicians, doing any of the lead boosts and the different punches. And now you can kind of write that stuff into MIDI, with Fractal and Kempers and all this stuff, you can kind of make it all MIDI so that the machinery kind of does all that stuff for you if you take the time to program it. So I like the advancement in technology. I still like an analog sound. I went and saw Lenny Kravitz recently, ironically in Mannheim, Germany. It seems like everything. I saw Manowar, Lenny. I played there at my show, and then saw Sweet there. So it's like Mannheim's like the new Detroit Rock City of Europe. But Lenny, has very just organic, just Gibsons and Fenders into, combo amps and half stacks, and his guitar player is fantastic also. And you can tell listening to it, it's a very organic, it's a guitar into an amp with a mic on it. And my ears didn't hurt. When I go hear bands that have all this digital stuff, my ears hurt. I don't like the sound of it. It literally hurts my ears. And so it was nice to go to a concert where everything was just guitars into a tube mic or tube amp with a mic on it, man. I mean, it was pleasant to the ear. Jeff Young is a big fan of this. We're analog creatures. Our bodies don't respond well to digital information, so I like digital stuff for recording and writing and stuff like that. But I think the ultimate output needs to be somewhat analog as best it can, just to be able to kind of it feels nicer to your body. You know what I mean? It's like, it's like a warm blanket versus an ice cube, which is what his digital stuff to me is like ice cubes on the ears. It's like, it hurts, so, there's kind of all this stuff that we kind of have to play around with now in our live performances as well.
Well, you bring up a very good point with that as well. So how because I've noticed a lot of guitar players, especially within like the modern metal scene as well, they do focus a lot on using pedals. And one of the things that I did like, so one of the guitar players that I was always drawn to was Angus Young, because it was just a simple, especially with AC/DC, they never, despite the fact that they had high gain amps, they would never crank up the gain too much. It was just the attack, and it was a simple chord into the cab, into the guitar, and that's all it really was. It was just a simple plug in and play. There was no reliance on pedals, no reliance on anything else. It was just the tone and the music came from them, the way they hit everything, the way they played. And that was always what drew me to, funny enough, your bass playing and your style, because it was just this raw energy. And like we were mentioning earlier about how certain instruments have songs in them, like your style, whether or not you know this, with a lot of the communities and closed musician circles that I play in, your style comes up and is very, very iconic, especially among a lot of the other bass players I
Cool.
speak with.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's just my hands. It's my hands playing it the way my ear wants to hear it. That's all that it is. You know what I mean? It's like, Steve Harris's ear. I get, but no matter what bass you put in his hand, when he goes to dial the amp, it's going to sound exactly like how he wants to hear it on Power Slave or whatever. You know what I mean? And that's just how we are. We are wired that way. Now listen, you play in a ballad, where it's a metal ballad or whatever, okay, sensitivity says, okay, put the pick down, use your fingers. It's got a better kind of tone to the track. So there's, we modify little things like that, but for the most part, we are who we are, and we play how we play because that's how we hear it. And that's how we hear it when we play with other people. Like when I walk into, play on sessions and records with people, sometimes they hire me to be David Ellefson, like bring the pick, bring the frickin' attack, make it sound like that. Other times it's, hey, love to have you play bass on this. And then I kind of try to make myself a bit more invisible, and just be the bass player, so, I because I've recorded and I've done that work a lot, I can navigate that a little bit as well.
Going on to Megadeth, and obviously in your first spell with Megadeth, how would you summarize your time in that period, being part of Megadeth and basically being one of the big four heavy metal bands of that era?
Well, look, when I met Dave, he was deciding what he was going to do with the rest of his life. He kept threatening to quit music and go sell computers or not sell, but get involved in computers. I'm like, dude, you are meant to be a rock star. Let's put that conversation away. And we all do it. I mean, I remember telling my friend Peter one time, I'm like, no, maybe I'll be an attorney. He laughed because you're not going to attorney. You're a musician, And, I think it's this right brain, left brain thing sometimes, where, let's assume left brain's the creative. And then sometimes it's like, okay, I need to balance it with some more right brain kind of stuff, but, when I met Dave, he obviously was transitioning from his Metallica thing, and I when my friend Greg and I moved to LA, we moved right underneath the apartment where Dave was living. You know, that was just divine, you know, like you couldn't plan that. And Dave didn't see it coming either, you know, and you know, the group was never put together of us just get together, jam and da 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 da. You know, Dave was very methodically writing songs. He had a very unique style. I had to fit my playing into how he was writing his songs, which I was willing to do. You know, no one put a gun to my head to do that. I was like, this is cool. You know, now one of the I saw, excuse me, as an opportunity to create my own path, create my own style, and find my voice in that and really own it, you know. Now, that's not my only voice, clearly, because I've done a lot of stuff away from Megadeth, even while I was in Megadeth. So that's certainly been the loudest voice because of the success we had. You know, we were on major labels, we had all the machinery that, I mean, let's face it, it's pay to play, right? Someone's got to write the check, you know, to make the thing happen. So, but the songs were strong. The charisma in the band was always, again, it was polarizing. It was volatile, and especially in the beginning, it was this punk rock volatility that drew people to it. It was dangerous. I mean, it literally was, you know, and that's a big part of the story with that. And you know, I think probably with Megadeth, what I learned is the transitions. Okay, every record needed to be one up from the one in front of it, right? And times changed, people's music tastes change. You know, the '90s were challenging. You know, with Seattle music coming in, and new metal music coming in, and by the time we rounded the corner into 2000, you know, that's why Nick Menza at one point was like, "We should just disband," you know, and just come out as a new band with a new name, you know, and you know, but learning to adapt to that, you know, that was as much, I think, probably with that as possible, you know, as any of it was as soon as you get comfortable, you're dead. You know what I mean? Like you got to always kind of push. At least that was the mentality in the band.
Cool.
You know, so that again, I use the '90s. There's a lot of transitions, and it's like, hey, if you want to survive and continue to be a career artist, you better step up and adapt and be able to, you know, to kind of transition and be a little fluid with that, which we did, and we survived the '90s.
Which I think, as you mentioned, like trying to survive the 90s was a very difficult thing because with bands such as like the grunge era and the grunge movement, such as like again Pearl Jam, Nirvana, all those sort of bands, and like you had the new metal scene, trying to survive that was probably quite difficult. And even with like albums like Megadeth albums such as like Euthanasia, Countdown to Extinction, and Cryptic Writings, while there might have been one or two little bits of fan backlash, I still think writing wise, that is some of your guys' best works from just like being able to experiment, and you can hear some of like your influences from the bands that you liked prior like come into that. And that's what I like hearing from artists, is being able to like take influence from like their forefathers and then coming forward and being able to put their own twist on it and everything, rather than keeping it balls to the wall like thrash, like being able to experiment creatively as an artist. And even some of the later stuff that you guys ended up doing from like Dystopia, with songs that like one of my favorite tracks is Fatal Illusion. Like, I love the bass part in that. Like that was to me is one of the perfect bass lines that encapsulates you as a player. And the good thing with your playing as well is like I feel that you were never pigeonholed, because even having some of your solo stuff and even with the collaborations with different artists that you've done, like with like Soulfly and stuff like that, I could hear being like, that's Ellefson, that's David, and I love cheering that.
Yeah, and I mean, look, they, you know, Max and Gloria hired me to be David Ellefson. You know, they wanted my sound, they wanted my charisma and my presence on those tracks. You know, that's why they wanted that. You know, and they trust. You know, they trusted, you know, my experience. You know, I had this conversation with Bruce Dickinson back in 2000 or 2001. We were going through the UK, and that's when he was his 757 pilot at the time. And it was great to talk airplanes with him because I'd taken some flying lessons. And so I was kind of nerding out on ailerons and flaps and this kind of shit, airline, aircraft terminology, And we had one. We touched on music just briefly for a second, and we were talking about. He said something to the effect of, if you're going out and you're gonna hire a musician, do you want the guy who's just kind of playing the local hotel, bar scene and karaoke thing, or do you want, playing the Holiday Inn every week, or do you want the guy who's been on the big stages, because it comes down to experience. Like, who do you trust to be on stage with you based on your experience? And there's plenty of fantastic musicians out there. They can, they all play great. But at some point you kind of go, who kind of has walked in my shoes? Who's had this experience that I can trust to walk on this stage with me, and they're going to step up, they're going to own it, they're going to really know what to do when they're up here, because there's a lot more to going on stage than just knowing the songs. It's being a performer. It's the oh shit moments, like, oh shit, my wireless stopped. Oh shit, I can't hear anything in the monitors. Oh shit, it's raining and gale force winds are blowing, and and you're trying to sing and play, and there's all these things you don't think about until they happen. And it's sort of, how do you respond in that moment? And I guess from a pilot would be even better. I like in Flight 666 when Bruce said, he goes, sometimes you just got to let go of the wheel and let the thing go through the storm and let it correct itself. And that's what a lot of it is knowing when to hit the gas and knowing when to kind of take your hand off the wheel and let things sort of, find their way. And a music career, a music performance is no different, because it's music is a spirit. It's not a hard thing, you know what I mean? It's this thing that you're trying to connect together, through all these sort of unspoken, unseen forces around us, and that's what we love about it, right? We're using some other senses other than what we can see and feel and touch. We're having to use our ears and our sort of just music is a very, any performance, I guess any creative performance is it's an instinctual thing. So as you compose, I love when Max Norman, we did a podcast and he was talking about musical conversations between the musicians, and it was very well said. When you're in the studio playing in the room together, like we did on Euthanasia, like we did on Killing Is My Business. In fact, we cut the drum tracks, the basic tracks we initially cut on Peace Cells together. I think the only song we used a click track on was the front part of Peace Cells, because we just needed it to be really locked in. But then after that, I think we took the click off and just sort of vamped it out. But there's a different kind of energy to making those records than when you're sitting down. Now you're just overdubbing to the speakers, the music playing back, and you're trying to get your part to fit in, and how perfect you want to make that be. I think that's really a sin of a lot of metal records, is everything's got to be so perfect, and it just ruins the human factor. I love records that are just snotty and loud and fucking wild and unbridled, and there's not a lot of those out there. I try to make those kind of records. I like making those records now. That's what I wanted the last Megadeth record to be. I said to Dave, I said, why don't we go in like it's Peace Cells? We have no time and very little money. Let's just write it, record it, move on. Write it, record it, move on. I was overruled. Instead, the record took 5 years to make, and now I'm not on it anyway, so fuck it,
I wanted to tell a story because I've always asked people, a few individuals, this question. I think I'm going to go with this. Is like anytime any rock stars, any bands that go on the road, there's always a scary moment that happens, and I just wanted to know, was there any moments that stand out for you when you were part of Megadeth or part of any band or just alone yourself? Was there a scary moment for you that happened?
Dude, the scary moments are always driving, like always, you know what I mean? Because, and the one that comes to mind is we were on the Killing Is My Business tour with Exciter, and we were driving. We just played our first 2 shows on the East Coast. I think we played Hammerjacks in Baltimore, and we played another one around New York, New Jersey area, something like that. And now we were doing this long run over to Cleveland, Ohio. And it was middle of the night, raining out, and Gar was driving, which that should have been our first indicator because Gar was so chill. He's like smoking a cigarette. Just he was such a chill guy, and he was driving fine. He was actually a pretty cautious driver. But we're actually what happened was our van broke down. That's what it was. Our van broke down. So me and the tour manager Frank, we hitched a ride to the next exit because I was the only guy in the band with a credit card, which is my dad's credit card that basically funded the Killing Is My Business tour, right? So we hitch a ride, we go to the next exit, and I remember we were at the Promised Land. That was the exit. It was the Promised Land in Pennsylvania. We get off the exit, and lo and behold, I mean, this is like straight out of like a Blues Brothers movie. There's one street light, and under it is a National Rent-A-Car. I mean, what are the chances that in this town of everything's closed, and then they happen to be open? We rent a car. It was like a Chevrolet Caprice. We go back. We load as much stuff into this car as we can. In fact, I think we had an equipment truck that was following us, so maybe they picked up the rest of the stuff out of our van. And we piled 6 of us. I seem to remember there was 5 or 6, maybe it was 5 of us, 2 in front, and 3 of us in the back. And I'm behind Gar. We're all packed in. There was a boom box behind my head. His DW kick drum pedals were at my feet, right? We're crammed in. And Gar's driving. It's raining out. It's early morning, 5, 6 in the morning, 6, 7 in the morning, something like that. And we're driving, and I'm like, God damn it, Gar, can you move these kick drum pedals? So he reaches around while he's driving. He reaches around to try to move the pedals, and he takes his eyes off the. And while he does that, he drives in the ditch at 80 miles an hour. And,
oh, Christ.
And we hit this post, that's like a signpost, like a deer crossing, shears that off, flies overhead. The car's spinning out of control. And we come winding down. I thought we were dead. I thought the car's going to flip. We're dead. This is it. It's over. Killing is my business, and we're done, right? The car comes to a stop. We're like, there was like just this moment of silence. We're like, holy shit. And so I get out, that boombox hit my head. I remember I kind of whiplash. I was pretty beat up, but no one was hurt really. So I walk up to the road. The semi truck pulls over, and I'm embarrassed. So I'm like, yeah, it must have been a deer jumping out. You know what I mean? I'm like, fuck, what are we gonna say? Because I'm sure we're partying at the same time, right? And the guy goes, yeah. He goes, well, anyway, you boys need a lift. So I think he used his winch from the front of his truck to help pull us out of the ditch. And we got back on. We had to put the little spare donut tire on because one of the tires was blown. So we drive like a bunch of vagabond hillbillies for like the next couple 100 miles into Cleveland for our show. We go to the promoter's house and get cleaned up, and we got the show that night. And somehow or another, we swapped the car out for a van. I think we went through like 5 or 6 vans or vehicles on that tour. Like we would just,
Christ.
and so until we could get out to California. And so sorry for such a long story, but I mean, I relive it and I remember it like it was yesterday. And, even over here on Bass Warrior, we're just driving around in a couple of cars, and, there's a van and a car. So it's kind of the same thing, me and the 2 guitar players, the string section are in one car and the rhythm sections, the singer and the drummer and the promoter in the other car. And, it's fun. I like it. I actually enjoy driving around. I've done it a lot. Me and Frank Bello did it. I did it with Bubblefoot. We did Bass Story. I've driven across Europe a bunch. I've driven across America. And honestly, I don't mind it. Because honestly, thing is, I trust me driving more than I trust. I'm always, when I'm on a bus, I go, what if the bus driver has a heart attack and drives in a ditch? Or what if he falls asleep and we all die? I mean, I've been in a lot of limousines. I'm like, this guy drives like crap. I drive better than this guy. It's like, let me drive. I'd rather drive. I don't trust. I just feel like this guy's going to kill me, so I trust how I drive. I like driving. So, for me, I don't mind it. To me, it's also, I feel like I'm kind of part of the civilization at the same time. I'm not just back in my bunk sleeping, So I enjoy being out amongst the living during the daylight hours, when I'm on tour.
Well, to sort of backpedal off the scariest or most fearful moments, has there ever been a moment for you where it's been like, what would be a perfect moment for Spinal Tap? Like, what would you reckon is probably one of the most comedic things that's ever happened to you on the road?
Well, God, let me think. Can't remember if there's ever been like a Stonehenge moment. I'm sure there has been like, oh, you know what? There was a Stonehenge moment actually when we were going to film the In My Darkest Hour video at the country club in Reseda. We ordered a back line of Marshalls, as you see it in the video, right? But that isn't how it started. Guitar Center, which is a big music chain in America, they delivered like, I don't know, 8 Marshall stacks to us, right? But we pull them out of the box and they literally come up to about here. We're like stacked up. We're like, what the hell is this? Turns out they're 410 cabinets, not 412 cabinets, right? They got 10-inch speakers in them, which makes them smaller rather than 12-inch, which would be this, which would stack up, to this high, right? So, 2 cabinets with a head, it's basically the height of a human, right? So we're like, dude, there's no way we're shooting a video. This is a Stonehenge moment right here, right? Like take these back. So they boxed them all up. They took them back. I had my Harkey cabinets and those were fine. And somehow from SIR or something, we ended up getting the proper 412 cabinets, which stack up like you see it in the video. But it was not easy, and it was a close call. We were like, "Oh, look, the video's like we got to start shooting. Like we got to set up and we got to start shooting. Time is money. I don't know if it was union, but shit costs money when you're filming stuff." So that was probably the closest, Stonehenge moment, for example.
There's always we had it on our notes, and we wanted to know from your perspective. And you've probably been asked this loads of times. It's something to do with Ireland and Dave Mustaine saying, "Give Ireland back to the Irish," and it kicked off, and then it was like
Oh yeah, you were like in an armored bus or something along the
armored
lines
bus,
of
like a bulletproof bus or something. Could you tell us about that?
Well, as you know, there was Northern Ireland, Southern,
Yeah,
Ireland.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I was just there with Kings of Thrash. It's still that, as we know, right? So we didn't know. We didn't. It was always Ireland, right? So we go over, and this is where U2, Sunday Bloody Sunday, all this stuff is from this old stuff from back in the day. And now it's peaceful. You can transition easily. It's fine, But back then, Dublin, Ireland was all, just normal civilization. But as soon as you cross that border into Northern Ireland, into Belfast, it was military presence for sure. In fact, I remember walking from the hotel over to, I think it was a Love Burger is what it was called. I remember almost getting hit by a tank, like coming across the street. I'm like, whoa. I'm like, it's one thing to see a tram or a car, but a tank, you're like, whoa. So it was,
Top of the morning,
you get the feeling real quick, like, just shut up and play your songs and get out of here. So we play. We have a little bit too much to drink, as we often did in those days, and someone had informed or misinformed us about the cause, which look, this is like this a lot of places. Merchandise is bootlegged, so it could be any of that, and we didn't really understand it. Dave makes a comment on stage, and some people are unhappy, and that's how it goes. You know what I mean? So we get whisked out of there quickly. Like, boys, get on the bus. We're out. Let's go. Let's just go. So sometimes that happens. I mean, you watch the Elvis movie. It happened to him all the time. It's like, okay, as long as you don't shake your finger, wave your finger, or shake your hips, we're good. What does he do? He goes on stage and wags his finger and shakes his hips and gets everybody excited and causes a riot. That's what rock and roll is, that's what it's supposed to be. So I was lucky to be in a band that had that. It was fun, actually. It was dangerous. It was life-threatening, but it was actually a lot of fun. So,
We
hey, gentlemen, I got to wrap
awesome.
up here. I got to get on to another call here, so maybe one more.
No worries. One last question for you now, Dave, and I always ask this question to all my guests is, how do you look back on your career?
Dude, it was dangerous, life-threatening, and fun.
Thank you guys for tuning in to the Creative Space Podcast channel. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you can be notified for more content in the future. Thank you once again.